Join the movement. Welcome everyone to the Ovis at Live event. I'm Ovis founder Linton Johnson. Tracy Grant has the day off. If you haven't heard about Ovis before, Ovis is the future of news. Our mission is to end fake news by incentivizing the truth. Today's topic, how the ratings and clicks advertising model skews the truth. Joining us now is my guest host, Jules Bernstein. She's a Pioneer Club member. Pioneer Club members are the disruptors of the Ovis world. They joined Ovis to throw out the old corporate news model and create something radically better. She's also a veteran of TV, radio, and print, and in San Francisco, and outlets in San Francisco such as KQED, which is the local NPR station, and KRON 4 News. She's been with us several governmental agencies and now works as a senior press officer for UC Riverside. Welcome, Jules.
Hello. Thanks for having me.
You're welcome. Thanks for being on today. Also joining us is our special guest, Emma Cobbs. She comes from the world of conversion copywriting. We're going to talk about that in a second, which is related to products, services, and brands with a special emphasis on storytelling. You were here last month, and we're welcoming you back, Emma. Thanks for coming back.
Thank you so much, Linton.
All right, before we get started, just a reminder to our audience, if you're watching us live, you can use the chat or comment section to ask us questions. And we've also put in the chat the link to both Jules and Emma's LinkedIn profile. You can connect with them there. And don't forget to like and subscribe to our social media channels. Please take a second to do that first. But let's get started. Jules, why don't you get the conversation going?
Sure. So Emma, you are a conversion copywriter. What does conversion copywriting mean?
Great way to start. So conversion copywriting, the answer is actually in the name. The goal is to convert somebody. So when somebody reads conversion copywriting, which is often found on a website for a product or a service, or even a LinkedIn profile for a service or a person, the goal is to get someone to take an action, whether it's click on a button, subscribe to something, or consider purchasing a product. That's the domain of conversion copywriting.
So what are some of the tactics that are used to convert people?
Great question. I think the first best goal with conversion copywriting is you first need to identify the value of what it is you're writing about. Is it a person that has a unique perspective? Is it a product that's going to help a certain demographic of people? Whatever it is, you first need to identify its value. And then when you're creating the copy for that purpose, you need to dial into the audience. What are their needs? What are their wants? What might be missing in their lives? I know that sounds a little bit, therapist-y, but it really does get on that emotional level of reaching out to someone and speaking directly to them. I think that's the anchor of the best conversion copywriting.
So can you give an example of a product or a service that you've tried to convert someone to, and an example of what the audience for that product or service is, what their needs are in that audience?
Yeah, absolutely. Thanks for asking. So one of the first projects I ever took on, I didn't even realize I was doing conversion copywriting. I really just thought I was writing about a product. So before the pandemic happened, I was working with a CBD iced tea company. And at the time, that was when, because they're all over now, but that was when CBD beverages were really starting to become something that people were familiar with. And so I say we, but it was really a small team, and I was the one handling all the writing. We had to do kind of a dual mission. We had to educate the public on what is CBD, is it safe, what would it do to me, and sort of get them interested in trying this new product that was really pretty new to the market. So that, I think, is the best, that's the biggest example, because it required research, analysis, audience outreach, education. And we ended up launching not only, the website for the product itself, but there was an ancillary blog that was really educational, all about CBD in the news, a scientific effects and research. And I had to become really kind of an expert on the topic to be able to reach out to people, let them know that this was a safe, effective, and fun thing that they might want to try.
And so what were some of the needs of the audience that you, or what did you perceive as some of the needs of the audience for CBDT? How did you reach out to them and try to speak directly to them?
Right. So we had a few target audiences. It was a very like hip Californian brand, as you might imagine. And so that was our most obvious demographic, was somebody who was cool and wanted to try like a cool new drink. That was a really easy sort of target because we didn't need to necessarily educate them as much. They were already on CBD. Maybe they were taking it, orally or topically. But there was a bigger, more out of the loop demographic. And so we had to double down on the education aspect of it and explain how it was different from THC. It wouldn't get you high. That was the most popular question we had. And so we really focused on pulling from, studies and what's the word I'm looking for? Articles, really, but like vetted articles, not news articles that were just about it, but medical journals. Sorry, that's the word. And so we were able to translate that into really engaging, interesting articles and blog posts and, taglines and website descriptions that made people feel comfortable and safe and wanting to try this product.
So that's interesting. As someone particularly who now writes news releases about science and engineering, I wonder, when you're selling a certain product or service, did you ever hear from people who just didn't believe that you were telling the truth about the product that you were trying to sell or convert people to?
Yeah, and we also had to be very careful. We couldn't make any promises. We had to be very, very delicate. Thank you for bringing that up with our language, because we couldn't say it's going to make you sleep better or it's going to make your day better. We had to just imply this relaxation and sense of peace and calmness, just really general terms, because there were a lot of people who were like, well, is it like, what is it? Is it a soda? What do I just have to drink 3 a day? Like, I don't, just kind of like, I don't understand. And we had to repeat the same kind of basic information about it. Yeah, for sure.
Have you ever been asked to edit information about a product or service you've been selling that obscured the truth about it?
Great question. So I've written a lot of product descriptions, copy for the product on a website, copy for like a press release for a product. And there have been times where I wouldn't say like I've been told to make any false claims or anything like that. I think that would be something that I would have definitely pushed back on. But there have been times where it's like, the feedback has been like, punch this up, make this a little brighter, make it a little more, fun. And it's sometimes you really can't do that without sacrificing some integrity. And so there's been, some sort of blurry lines there, I would say.
How hard is it to push back on that, especially when you're getting paid by a client? The reason why I bring that up is, my first experience, I went to Northwestern University. You're filled with the ideals of giving voice to the voiceless. I went to the middle school of journalism, right? And it's all about hardcore journalism. And then you get into the corporate world, and now you're having to balance those ideals and those ethics with ratings and clicks. And I remember my first story, one of my first jobs as a cub reporter at KTV in Wichita, Kansas. I was assigned to this story called Water Joe. And I'm like, what is Water Joe? And Water Joe is caffeinated water. And I was like, why is this news? And so basically my instructions were to go talk to the sales guy, because they had a client, which was Water Joe, and they needed some publicity about that. And I just I felt to myself, I'm sorry, this is not news. But then I got a boss that says, well, then you're not a reporter here anymore. Like at some point you could lose your job speaking to the man. How do you balance those pressures?
So it's so interesting, because that reminded me of, I was kind of in the room for something that happened. I used to be part of a food incubator in Brooklyn, which of course it was in Brooklyn. And there were a lot of, yeah, right. A lot of food businesses that were working out of an old Pfizer building. So it was a huge, huge facility. And one of the brands was under investigation from the FDA. And one day
Oh,
they
wow.
like swept the place and kind of confiscated, because we were working in the same workspace,
Wow.
but those men in the black, they were not for us. They were for one of the other brands. And up into that point, the woman who ran the business, she would be advertising, putting the product out, selling it, as she was, while being on, and she knew she was being investigated, and she knew that she probably needed to pull the product, but she hadn't done so. She was advertising right up until the raid, frankly. And so that was a really interesting example of someone who has one narrative while behind the scenes things are just coming apart.
I have a question for you, Linton.
Yeah.
If you can remember, I don't know if you can remember, but that day in your Cub reporting experience when you were voluntold to report on caffeinated water, is there another
big breaking news?
Yeah. Is there another story that you wanted to report that day that you didn't because you had to follow the caffeinated news beat?
I have no idea. I honestly, I don't
water.
remember that the caffeinated news beat.
Sorry, caffeinated water. I'm not caffeinated enough.
Sometimes the news feels like it's on caffeine. It's like, but no, I don't remember what that. I mean, every day's a blur in the newsroom. I do remember that story because I was just so shocked that there's 30 minutes in the newscast. Half of it is taken up by commercials. So there's really like 22 minutes of actual news. And we're going to spend 2 minutes of that on caffeinated water because the next minute we're going to go into a commercial about caffeinated water. And so, I mean, I just felt like I was an extended commercial when we could have been talking about substantive issues like, climate change or racial injustice or all these other big things that are important. Or we're kind of farm country. What are the farm subsidies doing for farmers right now? Like issues that were important to people out there beyond caffeinated water. I think we have coffee. That's also caffeinated water. And I'm not sure why we were doing that other than it was for money.
I guess what I'm kind of wondering about is what kinds of news does not get reported when these kinds of stories are forced on reporters, and how can Ovis help overcome some of that that tendency to report things that are less important to an audience?
That's a great question. So what we're trying to design is a system where you're not worried about having a select number of minutes to fill, right? The news has got 22 basically minutes in that half-hour newscast. And they're only going to use the 22 minutes on stories that are going to get them the most money and get the most eyeballs. Well, you're not constrained. We're not doing the ratings and clicks eyeball game here at Ovis. What we're doing is we're directly incentivizing truth telling. So, for example, when someone has a story idea, a great story idea, they can pitch that on the Ovis platform. And then the community can upvote that story. And when they upvote that story, they're contributing tokens. And each token, let's just say for the sake of simple math, is worth $1. So say 100 people say, yeah, I like that story. Here's a token. Now that story comes pre-funded with $100. And there are lots of journalists out there that will write that story. Another story might have 1,000 tokens to it. And a journalist might write that story. But this gives now journalists the options to choose from the different stories that are pre-funded, and they can focus on telling the truth of that story and not have to worry about ratings and clicks because we already know there's an audience for it and they put their money where their mouth is. And so some stories that may have, a journalist might write the $1,000 story and the $100 story. It just gives a lot more options for journalists, and they're all pre-funded, and it allows journalists to really focus on what everybody is after, and that's the truth and not ratings and clicks.
That's so interesting. And getting back to conversion, I wonder if Emma could speak a little bit, if people are concerned about people with ulterior motives trying to convert you to something, what are the red flags that we should be looking out for?
Right. Well, I wish it was as easy as saying, watch out for these 5 words, or something simple like that. I find that it's a little more insidious. Something that actually a good rule of thumb is if something seems a bit too good to be true, it probably is. I think something like if claims are being made, and I'm just talking in conversion copywriting world, not for me, I can't speak to, the news world necessarily, but if something is making claims, saying that it's going to like change your life, or perhaps they have testimonials from people saying, this changed my life. Everything is so much better now. I can't believe, thanks to the, product. Or if it's a person who's trying to get you to commit to maybe their program of coaching or training or something like that, if they are promising things or preying on emotions, making you feel like, what am I, like some sort of dummy who's missed out on this amazing opportunity? I better act now. Creating a sort of anything that creates sort of anxiety in a person, I find, is a much more nefarious use of conversion copywriting, because you can appeal to somebody's logic, you can appeal to somebody's principles, but you could also prey on people. And I think that's something that, as an ethical, writer, I avoid at all costs, but I do see it a lot. It's that preying on, like, you should do this, you've made a mistake, I'm here to help you, that kind of a thing.
Hey, Jules, I have a question for you. How many times when you're in the newsroom did you have to do that story, about will it kill you? Like chopped, I don't know, chopped tomatoes, will they kill you? It's always the will it kill you thing that tonight at 10 we explore whether, turkey that comes from Australia will kill you tonight and your kids. I don't know. It's just always going to that emotion of death and destruction.
I mean, I never encountered anything in any of the newsrooms where I worked that was on the level of like a Weekly World News. I don't know if you guys are old enough to remember this tabloid that used to be sold in supermarkets right by the register that had headlines like "Sliced onion screams in pain." Like I never reported on anything like quite that egregious.
Okay,
but
right,
certainly there's in the ethics of news, I went to SF State and I did their broadcast and electronic communications program there. And, you're required to take ethics in news media, and they teach you all about how you have to balance opinions. And so, you come up with this headline that's sort of preying on people's anxieties, as Emma was talking about, like, here's a thing. Is this thing bad? And then let's get two opinions about if it's bad or good, but none of those opinions. So as someone who worked in social science research and who now represents scientific research, none of this stuff that gets reported on, or very rarely is the stuff that gets reported on, talked about in terms of statistical relevance and actual research. It's opinions that are balanced on both sides, but neither opinion might really be worth a damn. Mm. So I guess I wonder for you, Linton, can you speak to how Ovis might sort of correct that tendency to want to, in news, to want to balance opinions, neither of which might be worth anything?
Yeah, before I do that, I'm just going to remind folks, if you have a question, you can put that in chat. Just look, depending on where you're streaming, if it's on LinkedIn or Facebook or Twitter, put that in chat and we'll answer your questions. And we do have one question that I'll get in a second, but to answer your question, Jules, I think that is an area where we want our community to come together and help solve these problems. I don't have all the answers. In fact, the whole point of putting together Ovis is to create a community-driven journalism platform. This is news by the people, of the people, and for the people. So as we make these decisions, we make them together as a community. Because the way, if you remember, we're talking about that pre-funded story that comes with a purse of tokens that are worth $100 in that example that we used. Most of the money is going to go to the journalist who writes the story. Some of it will go to the fact checkers, because each story is triple fact checked. So the fact checkers get to make some money. There's a little bit of money for the editor, but the remaining money goes back to the community, because what we're trying to do is take give the power back to the people and incentivize truth telling for the entire community. And part of that process is we want to also have their voice. So some issues I can have an answer for. Others, we're looking for our community to come together and help solve those problems. So I'm going to toss the question back to you, Jules. As a member of the community, as a Pioneer Club member, how would you solve that problem? Or at least begin the discussion. I mean,
I admit my biases. I work for a university.
Mhm.
I represent scientists and scientific research. So with that bias fully acknowledged, I want to hear from scientists. You know, if people are worried about something, I don't want to hear an endless back and forth from random people about like whether someone drank the water and they developed an itch on their ankle the next day. Like I want to hear a, at least a balance of, okay, has someone tested this water with modern scientific equipment and found that there are chemicals in it that are known to have adverse health effects? You know, I don't want to just hear from like someone random who might not be qualified to make an answer. I want to hear from people who've
The
spent most of
experts.
their lives studying a topic about whether or not something is legitimate.
So something like that, we would take the community and say, hey, listen, do we want to have random people who have no expertise in this commenting, or we want one of our community rules is let's hear from the experts and get varying viewpoints from experts versus people who have no idea what the heck you're talking about. So that would be something the community come together and say, this is how we're going to approach journalism. We're going to hear from the experts, and that would be a community decision. We do have a question from Patty. Patty, she's asking you, Emma, how is AI affecting copy editing? Will it affect copy editing by humans? And in your opinion, what are the benefits and pitfalls of AI-driven copy editing?
Okay, yeah. I mean, great question. We're only starting to see the effects that it has. And in my opinion, it's so incredibly advanced already. It makes me feel like I don't know, excited and nervous at the same time. Yeah, I have two different answers for you, Patty. There is the AI involved in copy editing and then AI involved in copywriting. So a copy generation, and no shade to copywriters, I am also one. Copy generation is something that I think can be automated to a degree. I think the best use of it is something where you're maybe working in tandem, like you have your topic, your keywords, things you want to cover, you plug that in and then get something spit back, and then you can edit that. I think that's a lot easier to do versus giving, like a chat GPT, for example, like a finished article and saying, copy edit this. Sure, for grammar and syntax, that's fine. That's one thing. We have Grammarly already. But I think when it comes to nuance, structure, the author's message, I don't think we're there, with AI. And I'm not an expert, but I think that the process of editing is a lot more nuanced than perhaps just generating your standard run-of-the-mill copy on a certain topic, because AI is an aggregator. It takes a bunch of what's there and just reorders the words, which is possible. We've seen it, but I think with editing, it's a little bit more delicate.
What about the ethics of claiming that as your work? I mean,
Oh boy.
take chat. Yeah, I mean, maybe that's a whole other discussion we don't need to solve tonight. But I feel like that, now you're putting your name on something that a computer generated. I mean, I guess it's your work as you're the one that asked the computer.
Right.
But I don't know. Like that just seems a little disingenuous to me.
Yeah, it reminds me of when it's been a minute, but when I was in school and Wikipedia started to become a thing and people were using Wikipedia to write their papers, and teachers were like, okay, well, how do we cite a Wikipedia article? What do we do with that? So I think maybe new conventions will start to evolve that involve like, okay, well, this was 50% assisted with AI, like how it says like grown with no GMOs, some GMOs, something like that. Like some percentage of AI was involved, but I know that, not to get too meta, but some of the sources that I might use or another copywriter might use might have been generated by AI, and I wouldn't know because they're living on someone else's website as their content. And so
well, that's an interesting question, because it makes me wonder about the ethics of what something written by AI might be subject to. The artificial intelligence is only as good as the people that designed it, right? And so, and we don't have any idea if something was generated by AI, what sort of ethics that AI was designed with. So I guess it's a question, journalism is one of the most hated professions in the country. I mean, I know this from spending many years in newsrooms and receiving more hate mail than I can.
Well, I will say that this probably is another topic for another discussion. We could go on and go into really deep rabbit hole, and I'd have so much fun. We could be here all day, but I think maybe let's stick with what we're going to talk about with Emma. And we also have a couple of questions from the audience, which, by the way, if you do have a question, you can use the chat feature on whatever social media channel that you are on. And be sure to like us, like this broadcast, and subscribe. We could really use the subscribers and the likes. So please do that right now. So Edith has a question. She says, I have a question about Ovis. Once the story is edited and all is done, how is the money distributed amongst the people involved? So the way it works is that the technology that we use, the blockchain technology that we use, automatically distributes the money according to a formula that is designed to incentivize truth telling. Right now, the formula puts most of the money for the journalists who did most of the work. And then it also goes to the fact checkers who will have to fact check it before the story actually gets to the platform. These are independent fact checkers. They don't know each other. They can't collaborate. And then that money, then the money, a little money goes to the editors, and then the remaining money goes to the person who pitched the story idea. We want to reward people for creating great content, great story ideas. And then finally, the remaining money goes back to the rest of the communities. That pot is split in those areas. Patty also has a question. This will require 2 to 3 fact checkers to agree on a story. They can agree on facts, but how do you resolve the difference in nuance? That's a great question. So, so the way the algorithm works, and all our algorithms, by the way, will be transparent to folks, unlike other social media companies where they hide behind their algorithms. But the algorithm currently works like this. It randomly selects fact checkers to fact check the story, and then the fact checker and the journalist will go back and forth to resolve the story and get to the right fact. And then when all the fact checkers agree, or I'm sorry, 2/3 of the fact, the algorithm is that 2/3 of the fact checkers have to agree, and then the story can get published. So it requires a lot of back and forth and talking to each other and working with that fact checker to come to consensus on information. And that's kind of the whole point, is to force people to come to consensus and not just state something because they believe it, but it has to be community. It has to be a community belief. We've got to get to consensus on information. So hopefully that answers your question there. Jules, you were about to ask a question. So
I had a question for Emma. So how does that model that Ovis has compare with conversion copywriting as far as fact checking? What level of fact checking goes into conversion copywriting?
So it does depend on, there's a few different topics, I guess, that come to mind, but for the sake of time, I'll focus on just products, for example. I wrote about this funny little thing called a soap standle, which is just a little stand you can put in your shower to keep your soap on. It's a clever little thing, you know, but for that, there were a lot of facts and figures that come, like how many people are using it, how effective is it? And a lot of that research, all of the numbers and the data came to me on a fact sheet from the person that brought me on board. So I didn't do the research myself. That's one way that it can be done. Like, you'll just receive some of the data and then you incorporate it into what you're writing. Some other times you will do the research yourself, for example, with that CBD iced tea. But in that company, we had an expert on board. And so, like, I was able to talk with them and get the information straight from their source, you know, because there's no such thing as a perfect source. So sometimes there will be a person you talk to, you'll get information given to you, you'll have to do your own research. And sometimes it's a combination of all three or more, you know, forms of getting that information. The idea is to be, because there's levels, right? Because conversion copywriting can be as simple as feel this luxurious sweater, right? But it's not a factual thing. Or it could be something like, there are 0.5 milligrams of CBD in every can of this beverage. What does that mean? You know, so there's levels to it, I would say.
Interesting. Yeah, and
I have a question about.
Oh, sorry. I was just going to
say.
No,
I have a question about.
Here's to a journalism newsroom where most of our fact checking. Once upon a time, journalism newsrooms employed fact checkers, but most of them don't have them anymore. And now we rely on expertise. So our fact checking is really just asking experts, "What's your opinion on this?" or "How do you feel about this?" We don't employ fact checkers in newsrooms anymore. So it's interesting that the Ovis model will have that built into it.
Yeah, and there are a lot of people out there who want to be fact checkers. And one of the things that we're going to be working on in the future is allowing anybody to become a fact checker. We want the world to be critical thinkers. We want to fill a world of critical thinkers and truth seekers. And one of the ways of doing that is teaching people how to fact check, because once you learn how to fact check, then even if you're not on the Ovis platform and you're looking at anything online, you can go back and try to see if it's true if you are trained in how to fact check. The fact checking process will also be community driven. So much like when Jules was talking about how do we determine what are sources that we use, and then there'll be a community decision on that. So will the world of fact checking be, and that it is open to anybody. It's completely transparent, which is another thing that we're trying to do, is return the news back to the people, by the people, of the people, and for the people. I did have a question for you, Emma. We had talked offline, which is, I think, the last month, you made something that was really interesting to me. A comment about the ads, the roles that ads play, and how you are led. The way stories are written is for you to read, so that way you get to the next ad, and you get to the next ad. And then you also said something about how much those ads actually drive, how much revenue they give to the company, or the news organization, or whatever company is writing. Tell us a little bit about that, because I thought that was really interesting to me.
Right. Yeah. I mean, I think anybody listening or watching, you probably get a lot of news on your phone. You read a lot of articles on your phone or just on your computer. And what has happened is that you are spoon-fed maybe a line or two of text and then an ad break, a line or two of text and then an ad break. In some stories, maybe it's a whole paragraph, but a lot of the time it's just a little bit. And I find that, I mean, I don't have the numbers on it. I know that outfits I've worked for that did have that kind of style of writing, it would be sometimes a percentage of a cent up to 2 cents, depending whether you clicked on it or not. But really it started to feel, at least for me, that the story was being built around the ads. And a lot of the time it had nothing to do with the story. I wrote for food websites. So a lot of the ads were food or food product based, but still, if I'm trying to, understand a message or digest, I guess that's a food term, a story, it really interrupts, I feel. I mean, I'm going to put my little tinfoil hat on. If you keep getting interrupted when you're reading something, you're not going to remember the message of what it is you've just read. And I feel like if that's the overall effect that's happening, is that their intention, or is their intention just to shove as many ads as they can in front of your face? Or maybe it's a combination of both, because I know the better, longer form articles I've read do not have a kayaking discount article every week.
Well, and then the money they make, it's just a couple of cents.
It's nothing.
So it's nothing. And so yet they're so desperate to pay their bills that they're going to do anything to get you to read that ad so they can make a couple of cents. It's not like you have a whole lot of money that they're chasing. I can see why people kind of go crazy. They want to make you get from ad to ad to ad so they can get a couple of cents. That astounds me. Well, and the reason why I bring that up is, again, kind of going back to what I was saying before, is about how we pre-fund the story. So the journalist already knows what they're going to get, right? And it's not, now they're thinking about just telling the truth about that story and not worrying about having to push people to the next ad, anyway, we're just trying to solve a lot of these other problems that we have. We do have another question in our chat, and a reminder, if you do have questions, you can always use the chat feature. But Curtis Min says, does this apply to print journalism exclusively, or is there a way to rate audio podcast or YouTube videos, or are there plans for that? And I think, let me try to interpret that question. Maybe Curtis, if you want to add to that, my question to you is, what do you mean? What apply to print journalism exclusively? Anybody want to take a stab at that? Maybe let me take a stab at that. Maybe he's asking about, does the Ovis model apply to print journalism exclusively? So if that's your question, please, Curtis, feel free to clarify. But if right now the Ovis model is applying, we're going to start off with journalism, but then we are going to be moving on to video and audio. So that would be print broadcast, or that would be YouTube, as well as audio. So streaming online, yes, the whole thing is we're trying to take the world by storm and try to bring truth to the entire world on all mediums. So yes, it would eventually apply to that, but right now we're starting with print. Good question. And he confirmed that was what the answer was. All right. Jules, any other questions?
I'm sure I can think of a few, but we've been at this for a while, so maybe it's time to think.
All right. Well, Emma, anything else you want to add before we wrap up?
No, this is such a great conversation to have, because it's easy in my line of work to lose heart when you're trying to economize language and get the most message across in the fewest words and dumb things down. So it's nice to see that there is some hope for critical thinking and discussion on a level that I've missed personally.
Well, you've been a great guest, and we're really appreciative of you coming back next week. And thank you for all the questions. Again, please be sure to like and subscribe to our social media channels and join us, be part of the conversation, and join the Ovis community. Again, thank you, Emma Cobbs, and also thank you, Jules, for being our guest host. Remember, you can connect with Emma through her LinkedIn, as well as Jules. Their LinkedIn profiles are in the chat. And I want to thank everybody for spending your Saturday with us. Please follow us on social by visiting our website at ovisnews.com. I'm Linton Johnson, and thanks for watching.